Hello and welcome to Generation 16, the series that showcases the history of Sega's Mega Drive. I'm your host, Greg Seward. Little break from the regular episodes right now because the Astro City Mini came out and people seem to like it when I go through stuff like this. So yeah, we got the Mini right here. I'm going to go through each game on this thing. I think it's 37 games in the order that they're listed. I think they're actually in chronological order for the most part, by year anyway. Yeah, little clip of each game, little quick review blurb of each game. I gotta say, the system itself is very nice. I love the micro switch controller, the clicky buttons. Really love that I can add other controllers back here. And of course, a regular HDMI out, not an HDMI mini out, which is I think what the SNK little arcade machine has. So anyway, without further ado, let's get into the games.
I spoke extensively about Flicky in one of the more recent episodes of Generation 16. For years I turned up my nose at this game on the Genesis because it just doesn't look very cool, or very 16-bit back in the day, plus it featured terrible box art. But after learning of its history and playing it extensively for the show, I came to appreciate the simplicity of Flicky. It's really a fun little game once you get a handle on the floaty, bouncy physics of Flicky yourself. Don't give this game a pass like I did for the past 30 years. There's a lot to love here. I've always been meaning to try this game, and wow is it difficult. Sega Ninja is a vertical scrolling shooter starting the Ninja Princess. You can shoot up, or any direction you're facing. You only have a certain amount of time to get through each level, which definitely plays a part. There is a bit of a power-up system here where the Ninja Princess can throw larger shurikens after collecting a certain item. And you do have some ninja magic, which is akin to disappearing in order to get out of sticky situations. I believe some later stages feature forced scrolling, but I haven't gotten to them yet. This is the first game of many on the Astro City Mini that could use some dip switches. As far as I can tell, putting in extra credits will not allow you to continue from your previous level. This is another game by Yoshiki Kawasaki, the same man who designed Flicky. My hero is an early brawler with terrible hit detection. You can continue, but only at the start of the current level, and the levels seem to go on forever. A single hit kills you. Your hitbox is way too big, but your punch is way too short range. I never heard of this one before now, and I doubt I'll spend any time playing it in the future. It did actually come to the US as a Sega card, and later on a cartridge. It was developed by Corland, which most of us probably remember better as Banpresto, which was its name after it was bought by Bandai in 1989. Space Harrier was the first of the superscalers and one of the games used to sell the original Mega Drive on launch day. There's an option to invert controls in this version as well as use rapid fire, which definitely makes the whole thing a lot easier to play, especially with a controller. According to designer Yuji Ishii, Fantasy Zone was heavily inspired by his love of the arcade classic Defender. This is Sega's super cutesy take on that game. In fact, Fantasy Zone is one of the games that popularized the idea of the cute-em-up, tough-as-nails shooters featuring bright, colorful graphics and cute characters. You don't seem to hear much about Fantasy Zone nowadays, but Opa Opa was one of Sega's early mascots along with Flicky and Alex Kidd. Weststone's original creation, which went on to spawn a long, confusing series of sequels, spin-offs, and licensed adaptations like Adventure Island, Bikuri Man World, and the Brazilian Monica's Gang series. Wonder Boy is a caveman who has to run from left to right because the designer felt like he could do Mario better than Nintendo. He's a caveman who rides a skateboard because the designer was totally into skateboarding at the time he made the game. This game's origin is so bizarre, it makes total sense that the series took such wild thematic swings later down the line. The original still plays great, though. Quartet is a 4-player action platformer that's all about surviving enemy spawn points and gathering power-ups so that you can destroy a level boss to earn a key and move on to the next stage. Quartet 2 isn't the sequel, but denotes that this is a port of the 2-player variant of the original game. You still get to choose from all 4 of the original heroes, but only 2 players can be on screen thanks to the limits of the Astro City Mini. This marks the first cooperative multiplayer game on the hardware. Quartet is a pretty decent shooter. It's easy to play and controls well, though the endlessly spawning waves of enemies can get pretty overwhelming very quickly. As far as I can tell, this is the first arcade game designed by Reiko Kodama, who Sega fans will know is one of the major personalities behind loads of Mega Drive and Genesis hits, as well as a driving force behind the Phantasy Star series in the 80s and 90s. So this is kind of a pseudo-arcade sequel to Alex Kidd in Miracle World, but instead of running around collecting money and punching things, Alex is basically running through a modified version of Wonder Boy. Alex can't punch things now. He's able to pick up time-limited power-ups that include projectiles, but that's about it. This is another two-player co-op game for the Astro City Mini, where a second player can control a girl named Stella. As far as I know, she never appeared in another Alex Kidd game. According to Sega Retro, The Lost Stars is all about Alex returning the 12 stars of the Aries constellation to the sky, the same as his ancestor, Halifax Kidd, did 5,000 years ago. The Lost Stars is notable mostly for the blood-curdling scream Alex lets out each time he dies. And the game will proudly shout, "The customer is king," every time you add a credit at the title screen. It's weird. This is weird. It's not a lot of fun, but hey, you get to continue right where Alex died every time you run out of lives, so that's something. The fourth two-player co-op game in a row. This is basically Sega releasing a game based on Ridley Scott's seminal Alien without acquiring the rights to the film. Even though this is a full-on overhead shooter, the atmosphere in Alien Syndrome is downright creepy. You have to find all the hostages on a given level before the time runs out and the ship explodes. Think like Ripley running back to find Jonesy before Mother blows the Sulaco. Do that and you face off against a screen-filling alien nightmare as a boss. Alien Syndrome is really hard. I haven't tried it with a second player yet, but as a single-player game, this is another title that could have used an easy setting on the Astro City Mini. It also desperately needs a two-joystick control method like Robotron or Smash TV. Being surrounded by aliens and only being able to shoot in the direction you're facing is crazy. Weststone's original Wonder Boy was influenced by designer Ryuichi Nishizawa's feeling that he could make a better Mario and his love of skateboarding. The sequel, Wonder Boy in Monsterland, was influenced by Nishizawa's infatuation with the game Wizardry, which explains why the simple platforming caveman action of the original game has been completely replaced by swords, sorcery, and the ability to buy and upgrade gear. Nishizawa himself said that arcade owners did not like this format due to the length of time players were spending on a single credit. That being said, though, Monsterland is the first in what would become the main theme of the series on home consoles. This set the stage for the action RPG genre of every console sequel in the franchise. Go into Monsterland understanding that it's basically a prototype for what was to come, and it's quite playable. There's not a lot to say about Shinobi. The original arcade game is great, though I'd take the Genesis Revenge of Shinobi, Shadow Dancer, or Shinobi 3 over the original. It's fun to play this one and see the roots of those later games, though. All three of those sequels make reference to Shinobi if you know where to look, so for someone like me who has very little experience with the arcade game, it's interesting to stumble across them. The Astro City Mini version of Shinobi has been updated a bit to remove the images of Marilyn Monroe, as well as alter the color of the Spider-Man ninjas from blue to green. I don't really know what to say about this game. This is about as generic as a vertical scrolling shooter can be. It's not fast, it's not particularly good looking or sounding, it's just kind of here. I guess it ticks a box on the Astro City Mini, but that's about it. I've played Altered Beast a million times. It's not great, but it still makes me very nostalgic. It's nice to have an arcade-accurate version to mess around with on the Astro City. The Sega Genesis port is pretty faithful, but definitely loses something in the translation. Mostly the difficulty. I find Altered Beast really tough here. Not something I'll be spending loads of time on, but still need to fire up once in a while. This two-player co-op shooter is way more interesting than Sonic Boom. First of all, the plane design is a lot more unique. Enemies attack from the ground and the air. Ground installations and tanks are a bit of a problem since your only attack is a relatively slow bomb. That is until you manage to get a couple of wingmen to fly with you. Then you're able to order them to fly either in the skies beside you or skim along the ground to take care of all the action down there. Or, in a pinch, you can use them as a special weapon, though there's a bit of a kamikaze aspect to that. It reminds me of Toplan's Twin Hawk, which came to the Mega Drive in 1990. The third and final Wonder Boy game released to the arcades takes another completely new twist. While the series on home consoles continued on in the spirit of 1987's Monsterland, 1988's Monster Lair is a co-op shooter. The only real thing linking the game to its predecessor is the graphical style, and even then, it's a pretty thin connection. Wonder Boy 3 is okay. It's nothing special. It's fun to grab a friend and play through once, but with the combination of platforming action and more traditional horizontal scrolling shooter on alternate levels. My only real complaint is that the platforming levels have a tendency to drag on thanks to the very slow scrolling at times. Another co-op game for the Mini. I know some people are really into Gain Ground, but I've never really gotten into it. It reminds me a lot of Monsterland in that it's a very slow-paced arcade game. You need to get all of your characters through each screen, including saving those who are taken out in the process. It's an interesting idea that feels weird for an arcade game. I have a feeling that this is much better multiplayer than single player. Yet another slow, weird arcade game that's better with 2 players than 1. Crackdown's screen is actually built to be a multiplayer game. I have a soft spot for this one because I think the light stealth element is kind of a neat idea. You and your partner aren't out to kill everyone in each level, but rather to set a certain number of bombs and escape before the time runs out. You have limited ammo, and you're able to press up against walls to avoid gunfire. It's a pretty neat game. I mean, what is there to say about Golden Axe? It's a Sega arcade classic that, like Altered Beast, is kind of nice to have here in arcade form. The Genesis port was pretty darn good, and had a bit more content than this original, but Golden Axe Arcade looks and sounds a whole lot better. Plus you get all those screams sampled from films like Conan the Barbarian. It seems like the Astro City Mini is absolutely meant to be played co-op, just in general. ESWAT is kind of like a co-op Shinobi, except you're a cop with a gun and limited ammo. After jailing your first 3 perps, you get to upgrade to an armored suit that basically makes you RoboCop. Now you're more of a walking tank. I've only ever played the Genesis port of ESWAT, and having experienced the arcade original now, I have to say that the port really didn't do it justice. These feel like 2 completely different games. I particularly like how your armor deteriorates as you take hits in later levels. Yet another arcade game that came to the Sega Genesis in a massively different form. I prefer the Genesis game, but it's cool to have the arcade original available to play whenever I want. I always like the massive set-piece backdrops of this game, like in the second stage where you aren't just passing by scores of the same airplane out on the tarmac, but one huge jet sitting at the gate. As a sequel to the arcade Shinobi game, I think Shadow Dancer is pretty decent, but Genesis owners got the best deal. Revenge of Shinobi is far and away a better game, and the Shadow Dancer port is way more exciting than the arcade original. I've never known what to think of Alien Storm. I love the idea of it, I love the colorful graphics and the fact that I'm shooting aliens, I love the play on Ghostbusters, what with the blue-collar alien hunters working out of a food truck, but when you actually play Alien Storm, it kind of falls flat almost immediately. You want to be using all that ridiculous firepower to shoot aliens from across the screen, but instead you get an awkward brawler that isn't nearly as good as Golden Axe. I appreciate the tongue-in-cheek presentation, but the game itself leaves a lot to be desired. Oh, and co-op. Look, I get it. Sega was fighting for a slice of the puzzle game market in 1990 and wasn't allowed to sell Tetris on the Genesis. It needed a puzzle game, and Columns fit the bill. But dear God, enough is enough already. Columns has been on every Sega compilation since the beginning of time, and this is the first of 3 versions on the Astro City Mini. Before I played the Astro City Mini, I'd never really considered just how many co-op games Sega released in arcades. Bonanza Bros is a welcome addition to this unit due to its very unique gameplay. You play as thieving brothers Robo and Mobo as they attempt to infiltrate various levels, remove valuables, and get out within a certain time limit. Each stage is crawling with guards, and while it's possible to stun them, things can get out of hand quickly. Guards can alert other guards when they see you or hear you. Bonanza Bros. Is really all about stealth, and it's also lighthearted. I really enjoy this game a lot. The puzzle craze of the early 90s was real. Columns 2 was released the same year as the original Columns. Honestly, the only thing that seems different here is the new flash mode where you have to dig down into the well to get rid of specific gems on each screen. It's still Columns. Another game that I'm super excited to see on the Astro City Mini. Thunder Force 3 was one of the first truly great shooters on the Sega Genesis. It featured gorgeous graphics, great action, and a wonderful soundtrack. It was so good that the decision was made to port it to the arcade, and Thunder Force AC is the result. This is every bit as good as the Genesis version, and an absolute pleasure to play. This is the version that eventually came to the Super Nintendo as Thunder Spirits. Rad Mobile is one of those games Sega fans all seem to know about back in the day. Not necessarily because it was any good, but because it was the first ever video game appearance of Sonic the Hedgehog, preceding the Genesis game by a few months. It was also a big deal because it was touted as Sega's first 32-bit arcade game. I was a little bit worried about how this would play on the Astro City Mini, given that it's a driving game being played with a digital controller. Surprisingly enough, though, it doesn't control poorly at all. Definitely not as smooth as using a wheel, of course. Unfortunately, bells and whistles is all Rad Mobile really has going for it. The world of the game looks exceedingly good considering it's a 3D environment built entirely of sprites. It's got great features like weather that forces you to use windshield wipers or night stages that require the use of headlights. But the actual game just isn't all that fun. With the Driving Across America theme, I think a lot of folks were rightly expecting Rad Mobile to feel somewhat like Outrun, and that isn't even remotely the case. It's just kind of boring. This is another franchise that I feel a lot of North American Genesis owners heard about but never really played. Well, we heard about the amazing Panorama Cotton on the Mega Drive. Fantastic Night Dreams is the first game in the Cotton series. This horizontal shooter is highly regarded as an early shoot-'em-up game and features some pretty interesting RPG trappings. Cotton's strength can be improved by collecting orange gems. Blue and red gems will give her single-use spells, but these can be used either as attacks or defensively. This is a really nice addition to the Astro City Mini. Arabian Fight is the epitome of style over substance, kind of like Rad Mobile, I guess. I can imagine seeing this game during its attract mode in the arcade. It looks amazing. The character sprites are huge, the line-scrolling levels have an amazing sense of depth, and everything scales smoothly as it moves in and out of the screen. What's more, both enemies and player characters sometimes approach the camera in full-on close-ups, and not pixelated, scaled-up sprites, but properly drawn anime-style images. How could you not drop a quarter in this thing? But the game is next to unplayable. A real shame. Up until the release of the Astro City Mini, the only legit way to own the Revenge of Death Adder was either buying an original arcade board or the recent arcade 1-up machine. Which is a pity because this is, as Hardcore Gaming 101 put it so perfectly, undoubtedly the pinnacle of the Golden Axe series. It's easily the main reason to own the Mini, since it's hundreds of dollars cheaper than any other buying option. Revenge of Death Adder takes the original Golden Axe formula and turns it up to 11. The playable characters feel a lot more interesting, from a female centaur to an imp to Gilius Thunderhead riding a giant. It's just inspired character design. The game is long, the enemies are interesting, the magic attacks even feel more satisfying. The beginning of the partnership between Compile and Sega is yet another puzzle game on the Astro City Mini, but thank God it's not another Columns title. While I suck just as much at Puyo Puyo as I do at Columns, or any other color matching puzzle game for that matter, I do like this way more, and even more without the Sonic the Hedgehog skin we got on the Genesis in North America. So here's a weird one. Dark Edge is a fully 3D fighter from Sega that released a year before Virtua Fighter, except that it was made basically using superscalar technology on the System 32 board. It features massive fighters on screen and a camera that swings around so wildly that it's almost impossible to keep track of where your character is, let alone perform any moves with any sort of precision. Dark Edge is interesting to try due to its seemingly experimental nature. It's definitely not a good game. In fact, it's pretty unplayable. But considering that it shares a system with Virtua Fighter, which basically set enduring rules and popularized 3D fighting games a year later, it's kinda neat to check out. Oh, how I wish they would just translate this game already. Ichidant-R is a collection of minigames that appears to be set in the same universe as Bonanza Bros. At the very least, Mobo and Robo make an appearance here dressed as Sherlock Holmes and Watson. The story doesn't really matter. You spin a wheel and play one of a handful of party games. If you succeed, you move on. It feels kind of like WarioWare, except the games are more robust in Ichidant-R. The more I play this game, the more I like it. I should really check to see if there's a fan translation out there somewhere. Virtua Fighter was the original reason I wanted an Astro City Mini. I've been saying for years that Sega should be doing more with their Model 1, 2, and 3 arcade games when it comes to compilations. Virtua Fighter pretty much set the standard for all 3D fighters to come, and like I said before, it's really interesting to have it paired up with Dark Edge on this mini console as an easy way to compare just how different things could have been. Virtua Fighter plays beautifully here, though I have to say it suffers from some frame rate issues if you play it on the television via HDMI. I'm not sure why that's the case, but if you stay on the small screen, everything seems A-OK. And if you're checking out the games on the Astro City Mini in chronological order, Virtua Fighter is the last real treat you're going to find. See what I mean? Stacked Columns is the third Columns game on the Astro City Mini. I will say this one has an interesting new play mechanic at least. Like most competitive puzzlers, you send junk pieces to your opponent based on matching gems in your own well. In Stacked Columns, however, you get to stockpile that junk and choose when to attack the other player with the tap of a button. It's a neat mechanic that's wasted on yet another version of Columns. Ichidant-R is the sequel to Ichidant-R, but I have to say it's not nearly as interesting. I think it's just the selection of games here doesn't speak to me the way it does in Ichidant-R. We're still apparently in the Bonanza Bros. Universe here, though now in medieval times. I don't really know what else to say about this one. For as much as I like the first game, I'm completely indifferent to the sequel. Perhaps I was a bit too harsh when I said that nothing past Virtua Fighter is a treat. If you like Puyo Puyo, Puyo Puyo 2 is apparently the best of the bunch. This game was supposedly super popular in Japan and introduced the concept of different types of garbage blocks in a one-on-one puzzle game. It's very cute and very playable if you don't suck at color matching games like I do. Dottori-kun is a really interesting addition to the list. This wasn't a commercially released game. Well, not really. It was included in arcade PCBs both as a way to test the system and apparently to sidestep a law about shipping arcade machines without a game on them. At a basic level, it's just a simple version of Sega's Head On, which happens to be one of my favorite games. Your goal is to collect all the dots on screen without running into the X. Later levels populate with even more X's to avoid. It's not something you're really meant to play a lot of, just a cool oddity.
And thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. Like I said, it was just sort of a quick and dirty look at what's on the Astro City Mini. I'm a big fan of the hardware design of this thing. I think it's probably my favorite mini console that's come out so far, but I think the games are pretty hit or miss. It's a pretty average collection of games for the most part. Anyway, if you like what you saw, please like, share, and subscribe, and consider supporting the show on Patreon. And in the meantime, thank you for watching. Goodbye.